Most CPGs are still building products the same way they did 20 years ago, but brands that win tomorrow, they'll let AI tell them what to launch before the consumer even asks.
The one who gets better at this in this flywheel starts really winning that demand space.
Think of your last product launch. What if you could cut that cycle from 3 years to 3 months? Now imagine doing that at scale. Today's guest is Bas van Kesteren, head of Opella E-Commerce and a CPG transformation veteran across Reckitt, Unilever, AB InBev, and Sanofi. He's built e-commerce engines at global scale, and now he's here to share what's next. In this episode, you'll learn why retail media is finally becoming measurable, how AI is changing product innovation forever, the secret to hiring for an AI-first CPG team, and why executional discipline still matters, especially in a hype cycle. And when I asked Bas how to future-proof your org, he said,
all the use cases down there, they all rely on maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 types of data. I think it's clever for CPGs to acknowledge this and build.
Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Reimagine with AI, brought to you by Sigmoid. I'm your host, Imteaz Ahamed, and I help executive leaders create value with the smartest minds in artificial intelligence. You may not realize it, but behind every major innovation in retail, media, and technology, there's a team wrestling with how to make AI real and valuable inside massively complicated matrixed organizations. On this show, I sit down with the business and technology leaders who are doing exactly that. Reimagined AI explores how today's most forward-thinking enterprises are using data, AI, and automation to transform how they operate and how they grow. Because it's not just about adopting new tools, it's about reimagining what's possible. Let's get into it. Hi everyone, and welcome to Reimagine with AI by Sigmoid. I'm Imteaz Ahamed, your host of the podcast, and today I have the pleasure of inviting Bas van Kesteren. I hope I said that right. I did practice my Dutch before this podcast recording. The GM of Opella E-Commerce on the show today. Bas and I have had the pleasure of working together previously at Reckitt. We're part of the, let's call it Reckitt alumni, and we go way back. So Bas, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And well done on pronouncing my name. You had it 90% correct. Not bad.
That's probably the limit of my Dutch, though. Every time I used to come in to the Netherlands, I used to get told off for not practicing any Dutch. So I thought I should put in a bit of effort with your name.
So on behalf of the Dutch, we forgive you, right? There's only 15 million of us left speaking Dutch, so it's fine. We're okay being niche.
So in terms of e-commerce strategy, in terms of being in CPG, there is so much happening right now across the industry. And, you know, it feels like wave after wave of new development is happening. You know, first it was e-commerce, second it was, let's call it tokenization and blockchain. Now we have AI, then we had generative AI, we've had machine learning and data science in the middle of it all. Today, I wanted to dive into what impact AI and this new current wave is happening on your business. What are the challenges that, you know, the businesses face in terms of adapting to all of this change? And specifically within e-commerce, you know, being the change agent within CPG, I would say at least over the last 5 to 10 years, what does this all mean for globally focused CPGs? So I want to start off with, you know, you've led e-commerce at some of the world's biggest CPG companies, from Reckitt to Sanofi to Opella. What's the biggest structural shift you've seen in how CPGs approach digital commerce today?
So actually, I've been doing this longer than we know each other for Reckitt. I did this for AB InBev, for Unilever, and I feel like an old man, right? But basically, I've seen e-commerce or digital commerce go from being a hobby for middle managers all the way today being all of the growth of these companies, right? We are the topic at C-level. Well, all of our direct competition have the same thing going on, right? We'll talk about AI a lot more later, but I think that the three biggest changes, AI is an enabler, but it's not the main thing. It's not the main use case, so, right? The three things, first of all, media dollars, right? That's the most obvious one, right? I've seen media shift from classical FMCG, top mid-funnel brand building into things like e-retail media happening, and us talking more about return on ad spend, organic traction, share of search, right? And AI is just accelerating this. We'll talk about that later. The second thing, though, I think is just as big, and probably the thing that still most of these companies are getting wrong, the catalog. Still, the SKUs that we sell on pure players, on marketplaces, on D2C, they were never built for e-commerce, and they still aren't, right? So still today, and all the companies you and I worked for, most of the catalog is not e-commerce proof. The shift is happening, but it's amazing how something so large is so important to growth is only well, just getting started in a way. The third example I think is very important and is also one that people are underestimating. We used to always work with singular customers. We would always send pallets to one customer, big customers, Walmart, Amazon. And now, of course, these customers are becoming hybrids or even multiple versions and multiple dimensions, media, etc. I think that's so important because we can't just rely on a semi-annual JBP. No, we have to think about what SKU goes where and how to activate it. I think those are the biggest shifts I've seen, and none of them are done, right? So I'm really keen to see where they go.
Perfect. I completely agree with you, Bas, in terms of thinking about the shifts in one, retail media, two, managing the e-commerce assortment, but the assortment right now, considering the complexities that are happening within both online and offline. And then finally, retailers aren't retailers anymore. They're
Exactly.
media companies, they're data companies, they're insights companies all at the same time. And a lot of CPGs, I would say, haven't, come to the party in terms of adapting to these changes as fast as they possibly could. So, in terms of CPGs, they've traditionally struggled to really know who their customers are at scale. How do you see AI from, data clean rooms to predictive models changing that depth of understanding of who is actually shopping my category?
And before I answer a question, right? So since GPT, we tend to call everything AI. A lot of it isn't. A lot of it is much simpler regression models, which are already very powerful, right? So back to your question, right? So consumer understanding, most CPGs don't even think like this. They think in use cases. And for every use case, they look at cost benefit, the amount of effort for the return you get. I think what will happen with AI, that's kind of the main thing, is for the same impact, the thing we could have done years ago, the effort goes down by a lot. Right? So all of a sudden, these things that used to be high efforts, because of AI, they're very low efforts. So I think the main shift you'll see, which kind of is using consumer understanding, you gave the example of data clean rooms. There's many versions of the same thing. It's just that the moat to these use cases is going down a lot. So all these brand managers, or all these big brand owners, when the moat goes down, right, they'll be more likely to use these use cases because the ROI goes up. And that's kind of one of the big AI effects we'll start seeing. And I don't actually think that most brand owners will understand that they're getting more consumer understanding. They'll just think in terms of use cases, which is something I've kind of seen and learned over the last more than a decade working for these kind of companies. People think in use cases, not always the actual neighbors, others, or the data they're using. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. But how do you think that the shift can be made within, legacy CPG in terms of adapting to the new tools and the new ways of doing these things?
Use case by use case, right? And the thing that people start running on is winning market share, right? Or any P&L driven metric, right? So the moment you're at any of these big brands, right? Let's not use the ones we've worked for, right? Let's use another big Swiss company, right? The moment they start losing market share because either their media is less effective or they are not responding with innovation in the right way, they'll start looking at, hey, what are they doing that we are not doing? That will turn into use cases. And a lot of these use cases, they'll find out are AI driven, right? Because the moat is going down. So the companies that I work for and have worked for do respond. And that means they'll start winning market share. And I think that's really the key thing, the key dynamic that will happen. It's kind of a pull effect of technology. Instead of basically you and me pushing our way into technology because we love it, these big CPG companies will be pulled into it because otherwise they lose market share.
So let's talk about hammers versus nails. And what I mean by this analogy is, a lot of the time we get excited about new technology and we're like, let's buy this hammer. And then we don't actually know which nail we're chasing to actually solve it. With so many shiny new things coming out in the market right now with AI for this, AI for that. You talked about, thinking about use case by use case. How do you approach finding the right hammer to nail the right nail?
It kind of comes back to the same, I'm going to use this a lot, cost benefit matrix, if you will, right? It's easy to sit in a room with especially experienced people to think of all the use cases of AI, right? So, and if you look at CPGs, a lot of the obvious use cases are being unlocked quite quickly, right? So probably content are creating, well, any type of content is probably the most used one today, and that's the one we're all talking about, right? But if you take a little bit longer, there's so much more key parts of the value chain that we can use AI for, right? Once you list all of those and you basically plot them in impact feasibility, you have to kind of choose the one with ideally the lowest effort and the highest impact, right? And then back to your hammer and nail, right? The moment you've kind of chosen the right use cases in terms of impact feasibility, then it's about using the right hammer, finding the right tool to do exactly that.
So if you think about personalization, CPGs often operate with data within thin data, so not that much compared to let's say the Googles and the Metas of the world, or even the retail giants. What are the practical ways do you think that AI can bridge that gap for CPGs?
Yeah, so it's back to that mode, right? So more and more of these tools that you had to kind of find yourself and click together and integrate, they're becoming one-stop shops with very easy to unlock use cases, right? So let's take again media, right? We know that basically the moment we make media personalized, it tends in many cases to work better, to have an high ROI. But instead of you having to buy media here, find the right 1P data there, connect it to et cetera, you now have tools that basically do it all for you, right? And you don't even need to be super knowledgeable about that actual tool or the kind of the thing that's under it. You just have to tell the tool, hey, this is the SKU I'm selling. I'll give you a starting point, maybe in terms of keywords or who my consumer is, and then the thing will self-learn, right? And that's kind of, again, back to the moat being a lot lower than before, right? And all these CPG companies with a lot less effort unlocking this power that before, a couple of years ago, was really hard to do, right? So, sorry for my language, but nerds like you, me, were very scarce, right? It was really hard to find them. But now this world is open to a lot of people, right? With kind of just the very simple understanding of like the more personalized a message is to a consumer, the more likely they're to buy and come back. That's all you need.
And the access to the talent as well has become a lot easier, I would say, right now in terms of being able to process this data through data scientists, machine learning experts, etc. It's a lot easier to find the right talent in order to execute this stuff and not necessarily have to build all the capability or hire all of these internal people and build a new team. I think you need to use these people for those specific use cases.
It's a double whammy, right? So these people are well, what you require from the person is less than before, and then finding them is also easier, right? So it's kind of a double whammy effect that we will benefit a lot from, and the brands will benefit a lot from.
So shifting gears to the retailers CPG dynamics, you've sat on the CPC side working with powerful retailers like Walmart, Amazon, Carrefour. How do you think AI reshapes the power balance between retailers and CPGs in the next 5 to 10 years?
So I've actually also worked on the other side, so I know both sides. And thinking about this, they both benefit. But if I really look at all the pros and cons, I think the retailer wins a bit more, or the one that owns the platform. And the very simple cliche behind it is that they own the consumer, right? So yes, the companies that you and I have currently worked for, we have all these brands and we can get better at making these brands relevant to consumers. But those platforms, the Amazons, the Walmarts, they actually have a direct interface to consumers. And I don't think that's kind of the superior force at hand, right? I think we both benefit from it, but net, they win a little bit more.
Okay. So many executives see retail media as both an opportunity and as a tax. What's your view on how AI can make retail media more value driving and not just, the cost of doing business?
So I'm putting a lot of time, and my team is putting a lot of time in e-retail media, right? And it's kind of going back in time 10 years ago or 15 years ago with e-commerce, because we're getting the same question. Is it incremental? Is it indeed just the cost of doing business? And the answer is kind of the same thing. It's attribution, right? We have to find better attribution model. And just taking 6, 7, 8 steps back, e-retail media in many cases is superior for obvious reasons. Why? Because it's end-to-end. You can track a pixel or whatever you want to call it all the way to consumer purchasing it and coming back. And at scale, when you compare that to a media, which is not end-to-end, the end-to-end version will always win. So like with e-commerce, when we started doing this a long time ago, again, I'm feeling like an old man today, it has to go through these steps, right? And a very key step is attribution modeling, right? The funny thing is that's never the last step. Because then once we've actually calculated and all the smart people have gotten into a room and calculated it's superior, then there's this acceptance phase. And people actually have to accept and comprehend that the world is changing and there's a more superior media out there, right? We're in that process now because attribution is getting better. It's never as quick as we want it to be, but the questions I'm getting are already getting better and better and better. I'm pretty sure 5-10 years from now, if you look at the pie of where we spend our media dollar, probably quadruple of the number now will be retail media, because we're just going to figure out that it makes a lot more sense from every single angle.
For sure. And I think, having that end-to-end visibility from, understanding where your shopper is actually viewing content, how they're discovering products, how are they landing on product listing pages to compare products, how are they picking that specific product to add to cart, or explore that product page. All of those signals now through a retail media platform is available to research, to understand, and then to act on. And the CPGs who aren't really, harnessing those insights are truly missing out on the opportunity. Now, this is quite new to us because historically, we've done media through the likes of TV or Google or Meta, who haven't been native commerce platforms. But the retailers are now waking up to that reality and, essentially absorbing that capability and giving for the CPG companies that end-to-end experience in terms of how we actually can go to market and distribute our products. So, in terms of going to market and in terms of execution, where do you see the highest value use cases of AI day-to-day e-commerce sits? Is it, does it come with media buying, content creation, or within the supply chain use case?
So the answer is kind of all of the above, right? So all these parts of the value chain are very high value, and AI, Gen AI, every variation of it will have a big value. But we've talked about the obvious ones now a lot, right? Content creation, media. Thinking about this topic even more and thinking about who really wins, right? It's back to that: who owns the consumer, who has the best proposition. So actually thinking about it a couple of years down the line, and the technology is already there, we just embrace it. Probably one of the key things will be this new flywheel. And this flywheel is more around media and innovation. If you take all these big brand owners, right? Instead of having all these smart MBAs in a room, thinking of what the consumer wants, taking 3 to 5 years, creating one single NPD, and then relying on this 3-month big bang, I think the thing that pure players have known for a long time will now really come into CPGs, where we say like, hey, we're part of a demand space. We'll have AI track what consumers want. We'll build an MVP very quickly to respond to that. The one who gets better at this in this flywheel starts really winning that demand space. And I think that's kind of the AI space that I expect to see a lot more of. I think really innovation is kind of the less obvious next space that AI will conquer in a way, right? And will just do a much better job than humans, really clever humans, have done until today.
One of the most fascinating, recent examples for me is Dubai chocolate, and how it's just literally just blown up. And it really started with quick commerce, literally in Dubai, and went viral on TikTok and Instagram, and now the whole world is on Dubai chocolate. So in terms of, finding these NPDs, scaling them, looking at the social trends that are actually making them big and getting to market as fast as possible, it's absolutely insane. Like, I recall even, I want to say 18 months ago, I was going to Dubai, and my daughter was like, "Oh, Dad, you're going to Dubai. I can't buy Dubai chocolate here. Can you get me some?" And I go to the airport. I was flying back. I go to the airport, and it was like $20 a bar at the time. Now it's become a lot cheaper. But, something that literally started from viral TikToks has just scaled the world in less than, 18 months, which, if we think about the NPD pipeline, typically at a CPG to launch a new flavor or to launch a new, variant, takes much more time just to do the research phase of what you actually want to do rather than scaling from there. So that's an interesting case study to really ponder on how other sectors or other categories can learn from that and essentially scale what works, rebrand it their own, and actually take it to market as fast as possible.
And it's a great example, and it's such an inefficient process indeed, innovation, right? It's so costly and so slow. But indeed, if you take these learnings, right, and you have, well, all these AI agents working together on scale, you could probably do how you experience Dubai chocolate 20x, 30x, and on a lot more examples, right? And the technology is already there, right? We can already do this today. We just have to kind of tie it all together. And again, a lot of this will be change management. It's not technology. It's about people and CPGs accepting this and being the first to move on it.
From a leadership and organizational readiness point of view, what are the capabilities you think every CPG e-commerce team should be building right now to be ready for the AI first world that's already coming?
Just to kind of take a parallel, because I think it applies here, right? We've been looking a lot at marketplaces and social commerce over the last years. And in the past, your and mine employer would basically take a specific approach to each and every one of them, right? So quick commerce would happen and we would build this specific solution just for that, per country, per brand even sometimes. And I think what I've learned for this type of commerce was the concept of headless, right? So you create one backend, one supply, one tech stack to kind of do them all. I think this will also apply to AI, right? There's kind of a headless approach to AI. Because if you look at it, kind of there's a data layer, if you will, right? There's kind of a foundation you need that can basically create all these AI-driven outputs. And I think as a CPG, if you kind of get, again, all the clever, smart people in one room together and kind of like on that whiteboard, put all the use cases down there, they all rely on maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 types of data, types of sources. I think it's clever for CPGs to acknowledge this and build one repository, one single source of truth to be ready for all future use cases, media, content, etc. And I think taking that pain now, doing the investment today, will yield a lot of, winning of market share later, right? Because you don't have to do use case per use case. You can kind of rely on one single source of doing it all.
Super cool. And I think this goes back to the conversation about making infrastructure decisions way ahead of time, right? Like in terms of thinking about investing in data lakes, CDPs, and all of this capability. Sometimes you need to invest in it before you know 100% how you're going to use it in the future, which is, taking a very big bet, looking into your own crystal ball and trying to predict where the market is going to go and how do I operationally kind of set up for that in the future. And then bring along the organization on the way there. So I think this calls out the balance that a leader within CPG needs to make between experimenting with cutting edge AI and then maintaining operational excellence and discipline. How do you kind of do that in a global CPG environment?
It's like where you started is like we've been doing this for a while, and we've seen so many big technologies changing everything. And AI it seems like the biggest one yet, and maybe it is, but still it's kind of another cycle, another big advancement. And I think the thing I've learned is that we kind of have to stick to the 70-20-10 principle, right? So 70%, you make sure your teams and your teams' teams really are around executional excellence, right? You can't innovate too much in those things. You kind of have to work on the things that will work to keep on driving the business. 20% are the things that are almost there, right? You're just changing things around to get it to the 70%. And then the 10% is what you were talking about. And that seems counterintuitive from a guy like me who loves to innovate and really embrace technology. But I think there's like an optimum. And optimum is around 10%. And the 10% of your efforts, the idea is that if you do it well, if you find these use cases with a discipline every single year, they become the 20, then become the 70. I think there's always a danger within every type of industry, not just CPG, to not spend 10% of it over 20 or 30, or even make it the whole 70%. But I think that's not the way to do this, right? You kind of really need to put it in a laboratory first, if you will, and then have it kind of graduate into the 20 and then the 70. And I think it's really important we keep that discipline, right? Because the mistake that I've been seeing for a long time, there's this new technology that comes and people go all in and we change the org and we start investing differently. We make it to 70%. And then you kind of go into one of the famous steps of the hype cycle, the valley of despair. And it seems like everything was for nothing, which of course, in many cases it wasn't. Look at the dot-com bubble, very famous example. So if you just keep it at 10% and have the discipline to keep on loading at 10% with new technology and kind of graduate the winners to the 20 and then the 70, I think as a company, you will win and you'll keep winning.
So two follow-up questions, which is one, how do you find the right profile of internal team to kind of manage the 70-20-10? And then from a partner selection point of view, to help you with the 10, to help you with the 20 in specifics, how do you kind of go through that process in your mind?
So there are two questions, right? There's kind of the internal hires and the external partner selection, and they are different, right? I think for the internal hire side, right, there's a common thing I apply to all hires, and there's specific something to the 10 of the 70-20-10. I think the first generic thing I use is a very simple concept. It's not about education even or your CV. It's kind of, are you very eager? Are you like a sponge for information? Or are you kind of really willing to give it your all, right? It's so much more about motivation than anything else, right? That applies everywhere. Then basically you can split up all the people who you end up talking to in two types of people, just to simplify it, two types of archetypes. Some people are great at taking direction and moving it within 2 or 3 degrees of freedom, right? And you need all of those because they kind of move to 70%, right? And you sit with them in a certain cycle. Every year you give them a budget and then you make sure they keep within those guardrails. And you need all of those. But then the other archetype are the artists, the creatives that really love getting something from a 0 to a 7. So in the past, they were a very small niche, and I probably started there myself. But now we need more and more of them because the 10 needs to be fed by them. And they still need to be eager. They still need to be sponges. But they also kind of have to be willing or loving playing around with technology, right? I'm not saying having a huge MIT education. There tends to be a certain type of person that kind of loves making mistakes and learning from it, right? And trying to add more and more of those. So external partners is a very different thing. Again, it's kind of two groups. For really new technologies, in a similar way, you want to have like quick, nimble partners that are willing to partner with you, and you're not stuck in these huge, gigantic RFPs. Only when something graduates from 10 to 20 to 70, you're going to go to a more classical RFP where it just doesn't become about nimbleness and costs. It becomes, can they scale with me? And do you have the right amount of people to really work hand in hand with my teams? So there are two very different things, but there's kind of a similarity between them, right? It's kind of also mindsets, right? Are they willing to really, it's such a horrible cliche, be agile, be nimble, be willing to kind of change as we're together finding out if the change is really happening. But again, always a difference between the archetype of the people that want to learn quickly, make mistakes, and the people that are really good at taking something proven and kind of keeping it with 4, 5, 6 degrees of freedom. And we need a lot more of that in these big companies.
It's really interesting how you talked about how the number of creatives actually need to increase within this dynamic. One of the trends within the tech world in terms of looking at teams, as in developers versus UX people. So let's say, 10 years ago, there would be one UX person to 20 developers. 5 years ago, that ratio changed to like 1 to 6. And now, given how, I don't want to say commoditized because a lot of developer people would be very upset with me, but given how easy no-code solutions are getting, I think that ratio becomes closer to like 1 to 2. So, when we're thinking about resourcing within CPG now, as the monotonous, as the process-driven work becomes done through RPA, done through robotic process automation, done through machine learning models that can match invoices much faster than the human can, or reconcile millions of transactions within seconds, or do amazing things on SAP that we used to have to hire armies of people for. I think these problem-solving skills, where creative people can essentially come in, think about the business challenge that we're trying to solve for, and then essentially solve it, I think that becomes way more powerful. And that's why I asked you the question in terms of internal resources versus well, partners, is because sometimes the problem is so niche, or the opportunity is so niche, that it's very hard to find the talent. And especially with the complexities in some of the healthcare categories in particular, especially when you're working in highly regulated markets. This is where I think it's important to have that bench of both internal talent that you can use, as well as external talent on call when you want to tackle an opportunity. So, Bas, in terms of thinking about where, from a talent and development point of view, people need to go. If you were starting at Opella as a graduate, or if you were starting at a big CPG as a graduate right now, what would your advice to that person be today? So given that you've had this long, illustrious career in CPG, and you're starting from the ground up again, what would you tell that person? What would you tell young Bas?
So I'm going to give you two answers, right? Just to first respond on everything you just said, right? Yes, I agree. This is like the golden age for creative people, right? And creative can mean a lot of things. Creative is not painters or marketing creatives, right? There's a lot of types of creative. And I think they are going to have a great, well, millennium ahead of them, at least, right? So going back to a much younger version of me, right? Because I think that's the other underlying conclusion of this poll, is that I'm growing older, right? And very sorry for this cliche, right? But it's kind of the cliche picture of like the ikigai, right? Do what you're good at, like to do, which is purpose driven, and you get paid for. But then I guess until now, there was a lot of emphasis on making sure you got paid and became good at something. I think there's less pressure on that. I think young people, without overshooting, that's always important. I've got 3 kids, so let me just say it as a father. I think they have the luxury of spending a lot more time to understanding who they are and lean a lot more into what that is and become that. When I grew up, I come from a very classical parenting strategy of no, don't just do what you like to do. No, try to lean towards the things that's going to get you paid with the highest amount of likelihood. And I respect my parents for them. They probably did the right thing, right? And because of that, I can feed their grandchildren now. So well done. But I think my kids will have a lot more luxury around, hey, if you are great at being a painter, right, which now is seen as an unlikely career path, still lean into it, because probably in the future, it will be more about what you're not just good at and get paid for, but also what you like to do, right? So all those people starting in a corporate career, let's kind of go down that a bit more. Within corporations, right? Just let's define it. A bunch of people working together on one goal, right? There's a lot of jobs to do. And there's going to be a lot more demand for a lot more types of skills, indeed, which AI or whatever computer process can do better. And a lot of these things will be other skills than today, and probably close to a lot of people to their real passion, which I think is a very positive thing. I love talking about this topic. I think with new technology, the first reaction of the majority is negative. We'll lose jobs. There'll be less jobs. We're going to have a problem with getting enough paid and unemployment. And I get that. I understand the fear, right? But like Keynes said 100 years ago, it also means that there will be more free time and more people spending their time on something they love to do, because all the things that they don't like doing will be done by machines, right? And that's also a very positive thing. So to summarize it, I'll give you something a bit more hooky. I think a young person just getting out of university or whatever school, lean more than I did into really what you love to do, right? Which is still useful, but stay close to who you really are.
Very cool. Bas, I know you're a novelist, and I know you really love to write. Tell me about your writing, and how do you find the time to do it? And what makes you passionate about it?
So I can shamelessly plug my book Robolock. Thank you for that. We didn't even talk about that.
Yes, go on.
I loved writing as a small boy. So in a way, it goes back to that ikigai, right? I always liked writing fictional stories. The last years have been very busy. I spent a lot of my time, apart from sleep, and trying to be a good father and working, right? And at a certain point, I kind of realized, okay, I need to have something for myself. And I tried many things, but unlike all my friends who had much more cliche hobbies, I kind of, after a lot of trial and error, came back to writing, the thing that I loved as a 8-year-old boy. Of course, time is still, there's not a lot about it. It's very scarce, right? So basically what I started doing 5-6 years ago is I basically, like a strategy consultant, I took 2 pieces of A4 paper and I just wrote titles. And those titles together made like a PowerPoint grid, if you will, right? And then instead of making it into PowerPoint with graphs and things I would normally do, they became chapters. So every time I would have time, I would have a jet lag and I would be awake at 3 a.m. or I had to spend the weekend somewhere in a different continent, I would find an hour or two of just write. And the reason I finished writing that book, wrote the book, please find it on Amazon where you can, sorry, is what I experienced quite soon working on that writing part. I got into like the flow state. I really loved it, and one of the best signs of doing something you love is that when you start it and you look up again, 2 hours have gone by without you even noticing. And writing was that thing for me. What I hated though is that it was finished 2 years ago and I spent hours and hours with amazing people, by the way, but editors, trying to get all the commas and whatever right. I hated that part, right? So you would think I'm going to be an author for the rest of my life, but that's kind of the part that kind of scared me, and I'm not sure I'm mentally ready to do that again, to be honest.
I'm actually in the process of writing a book, and I find it a huge struggle to sit down and actually do it. So the solution I've come up with is I actually pay someone online to be on Zoom with me, and they literally just look at me writing, and I feel guilty if I don't write because I paid this person to just stare at me watching me write. So that's the only way I get pen to paper at the moment.
It's a cost benefit again, right? The other word of this pod, right? It's kind of, that is still a lot better than you not doing it after all, right? So if you, whatever path you find to get the output there, to make something from a concept or a vague idea to something readable, listenable, seeable, etc. It's kind of whatever process you use to get there. It's fine. Don't feel guilty about it. Actually, the niche that I am in, that I like to sit in front of a keyboard, where I spend most of my hours and I type a book, I wouldn't advise it to anyone. You really have to really be a very specific person like me to do that to yourself. To most people I know, I would say, do what you are doing. Have someone listen to you or record it. I just know how specific it is that I actually enjoy typing or writing, right? It's such a specific thing.
Amazing. Bas, this has been a wonderful chat. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you after so long. Thank you for being on Reimagine with AI. Thank you for being a partner with us at Sigmoid. We really appreciate the insights and all the knowledge you've shared today, and looking forward to doing this again.
My pleasure. Thanks.
That was my conversation with Bas van Kesteren. And what stood out to me was how deeply we're rethinking product innovation, talent strategy, and retail media in the light of AI's rapid evolution. We talked about why legacy product pipelines are getting replaced by real-time demand sensing, why CPGs need to act more like tech companies when it comes to org design, and how AI is lowering the barrier to entry for personalization and media effectiveness. I hope it gave you a new perspective on how you can prioritize use cases, build the right data infrastructure, and future-proof your teams. If this episode sparked some new thinking for you, share it with a colleague who's navigating the same challenges in digital commerce or CPG leadership. And if you want to keep learning how leaders are applying AI to drive real-world results, make sure to subscribe and leave us a review. It really helps us with getting more people to discover the show. Thanks for being part of the Reimagine with AI community. I'll see you next time.